When I lost my job, my wife let another guy sleep in my bed, drive my car, and told him I was just her roommate. When I found his shoes in our closet, she mocked me. So I took every receipt and call log to his fiancée's baby shower with a USB labeled, "Your baby daddy's side chick." When I walked into that baby shower, I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to burn the whole illusion down. My ex-wife, Lila, always said I was too passive, too slow to see what was right in front of me. That day, she was about to learn how fast I could strike once I finally saw everything clearly. I held a gift bag in my hand, baby blue wrapping, a neat white bow. Inside wasn't a present, though. It was a flash drive, a stack of printed photos and screenshots from her messages. Every lie she'd told, every photo she'd sent, every receipt she'd forced me to pay while she played house with another man, all neatly organized. I spent weeks collecting it all. The man she'd been sleeping with, his name was Evan. The same Evan who smiled on the baby registry, hand on his fiancée's pregnant belly. The same Evan who'd been driving my car, wearing my hoodie, and eating breakfast at my table while I was out hunting for jobs after getting laid off. I'd lost my job in March, downsizing. I came home early that day, still in shock, only to find men's shoes I didn't recognize in our closet. Size 11s. Not mine. I confronted her that night, and she laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "You finally noticed? God, you really are slow. He's been around for months. You're just my roommate at this point." That word, roommate, hit harder than any insult I'd ever heard. Then she twisted the knife deeper. She told me Evan knew about me, said I was too pathetic to leave, that she kept me around because I still paid the rent and her credit cards. She told him I was good practice for real life, and she said it with this smirk, like she was proud of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the tattoo. His name, on her thigh. I remember my knees almost gave out when I saw it. I asked her why. She said, "Guess you finally got smart, huh?" And walked away like nothing had happened. That night, I packed a bag and slept in my car. My car. The same one Evan had been using. Over the next few days, I found out everything. The calls, the hotel receipts, the messages. I wasn't the only one she lied to. Evan had a fiancée named Tara. They were expecting a baby, due in a month. He told Lila he was just trapped and couldn't leave yet. Lila believed him. I didn't. So when Tara's baby shower came up, public, family, friends, decorations and all, I saw my chance. I showed up uninvited. Every eye turned toward me as I stepped through the door with that gift bag in hand. Tara smiled at first, confused. "Oh, hey, do I know you?" she asked. Lila's face, though, her smile fell. Evan froze behind her, hand still resting on Tara's shoulder. I smiled, calm, quiet. "You're about to." The room went dead silent, because inside that bag wasn't just evidence. It was the whole truth, wrapped in baby blue paper and a bow. And when Tara pulled it out and started reading the first message, I watched Evan's face drain of color. But that was just the beginning, because there was one thing no one in that room knew yet. Something even Lila didn't know. Something that would make her wish she'd never called me just a roommate. And that secret, I'd been keeping it for weeks. Before all this, before the betrayal and the humiliation, I really thought Lila and I were solid. We'd been together 8 years, married for 5. We met in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a friend's birthday party. She was bold, magnetic, the kind of woman who could make an entire room turn its head. I was quieter, steadier. I thought that balance worked. We both worked full-time. I was in logistics, managing shipping accounts. She worked in digital marketing. Her job always seemed more fun, more creative. But she complained constantly about her coworkers, about carrying the team. Still, she was the one who pushed me to buy a house together, to combine our finances, to get a joint credit card. That card turned out to be one of my biggest mistakes. Started small. "Can you just pay this month's bill?" My paycheck was late. Then it became a routine thing. Makeup, clothes, random Amazon charges. She always promised she'd pay me back. I didn't push because that's what marriage was, right? Teamwork. Trust. Looking back, I realize now she'd been conditioning me for years. getting me used to shouldering her financial messes. Then came the layoff. The company was restructuring, and half of us were cut loose. I was 36, suddenly unemployed, terrified about bills, but Lila was oddly calm about it. Too calm. She said, "Don't worry about it. Take your time. Figure out what's next." At first, I thought that was support, but now I see it for what it really was: permission. She wanted me gone during the day so she could live her double life without worrying I'd walk in. While I was out job hunting, she was using my car to meet up with Evan. I didn't even notice at first. She'd say she was running errands, going to yoga, or helping her mom. Sometimes she'd pick me up after interviews, pretending she'd just gotten off work herself. She played me like a damn piano. It wasn't until a Saturday morning in May that things started unraveling. I got up early to take my suit to the dry cleaner. When I went to grab my shoes, I saw them. Those size 11 sneakers shoved under the bed. I remember freezing, thinking maybe they belonged to her brother or a friend. But when I asked, she laughed right in my face. "God, you're so naive," she said. "Do you really think I'd hide something like that if I cared about getting caught?" Her words didn't even sound human. They sounded cold, like she'd already detached herself from the damage she was causing. After that, I started digging. I pulled the phone bills. I checked her laptop. I found dozens of calls to EM and texts about how pathetic I looked applying for loser jobs. That night, I sat in my car scrolling through their messages. She told him I was basically her live-in butler, that I still thought we were married, and the two of them laughed about it. Every single text chipped away at the version of her I thought I knew. When I finally found out who he was, a manager at some car dealership uptown, it felt like my chest collapsed. Evan had been selling me reliability packages on my own car just months before. And then the cruelest part: finding his fiancée's social media, realizing she was pregnant, happy, and completely in the dark. That's when everything shifted. I stopped crying. I stopped begging. I stopped caring about saving anything. I started documenting, quietly, carefully, every receipt, every charge, every message. Because if Lila thought I was slow before, she was about to see what slow looks like when it's deliberate. And when I found the perfect way to deliver it all, to her and him both, I realized something else, something darker. There was one more betrayal buried underneath everything. One that hadn't surfaced yet. And when I uncovered it, it changed everything I thought I knew about how deep this rabbit hole went. After the night I found those messages, I started living a double life of my own. To Lila, I was the same quiet husband, still sending out resumes, still trying to get back on my feet. But every morning when I left the house with my laptop and coffee, I wasn't job hunting. I was building a case. I made copies of everything. Every charge she'd made on our joint card, restaurants, hotels, Uber rides to the same 3 addresses. I took photos of receipts she crumpled into the trash. I even installed a backup app on her phone when she left it charging in the kitchen one night. It automatically sent every photo and message to my email. By week 3, I had over 300 screenshots. I didn't just want proof she cheated. I wanted proof she used me, financially, emotionally, strategically. The money trail was worse than I expected. She drained over $6,000 from our savings since I lost my job. Most of it was labeled bills or groceries. But the statements didn't lie. There were charges for luxury hotels, dinners for 2, and designer clothes I'd never seen her wear. When I asked about the missing money, she brushed me off. "Relax, I'm handling it," she said. "You've been so stressed lately. Just focus on getting hired." That line, "focus on getting hired," was what kept me quiet. But inside I was boiling. Around that time, I started seeing signs of Evan everywhere. His cologne on our pillows. His keychain left on the counter once. Once, when I came home early from a failed interview, I found an unfamiliar beer bottle in the trash. When I asked, Lila said her cousin stopped by. That lie was so lazy it almost made me laugh. The final push came 2 weeks later. I went to return some stuff from her car, and in the glove box I found an envelope from the dealership. Inside was a printed photo, Evan and Lila at some rooftop bar, kissing. She had her hand on his chest, showing off a small heart tattoo. The same one I'd later find up close. Only this time, I could read the name inside it. Evan. It was like my brain broke in two. That night, I didn't say a word. I just sat on the couch while she scrolled through TikTok like nothing was wrong. She noticed me staring and said, "What?" Like I was the one acting weird. I didn't answer, because I'd already made my decision. If she wanted to play with my life, I was going to make sure she lost everything she thought she controlled, her reputation, her fake perfect image, her financial safety net. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to let her dig her own grave, and then I'd hand her the shovel. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A mutual friend posted on Instagram, "Congrats to Tara and Evan on the baby. Shower next month." Tara, the fiancée, the woman who had no clue. I clicked through the pictures. Tara smiling, 8 months pregnant, surrounded by family. Evan's arm around her. That's when I realized my revenge didn't need to be cruel. It just needed to be honest. Because the truth alone was enough to destroy them. So I spent the next 3 weeks planning it like a military operation. Printing, organizing, labeling. Every message. Every transaction. Every picture. But just when I thought I had it all figured out, something new came in through that phone backup app. Something that changed my entire understanding of what Lila had been doing. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't just manipulation. It was calculated theft. And I wasn't her only victim. I thought I'd already hit bottom. Then I found the spreadsheet. It was hidden inside a Google Drive folder she'd left open on the laptop. I almost walked away when I saw the file name, Housekeeping, Contacts and Channels. Like some literal joke. But I clicked. I should have burned the laptop instead. It wasn't just receipts and hotel confirmations. It was a ledger. Names, towns, dates, amounts. Columns labeled deposit, hold, pickup, clear. Underneath were phone numbers, fake driver's license IDs, a list of cars with license plates next to them. My head spun. At the bottom of one sheet was a note in her handwriting. Recommend. Use unemployed, less suspicious. He pays everything. That sentence felt like a punch that left me airless. She hadn't been screwing around. She'd been building a machine, and I was one of the parts. The ledger tied my name to 5 other men. Not all married. Not all hiding. All of them had one thing in common. Suddenly drained accounts, sudden oil change or storage fees, vanishing electronics, and a woman who called herself a girlfriend or roommate right before everything fell apart. The pattern was identical. Get close, get them to shoulder bills while out of the house, use their address and credit history to apply for temporary credit lines and cash pickups, then rinse and repeat. I scrolled until my lunch went cold and realized with a kind of lazy horror that she had used my social security digits. Numbers I'd trusted with her when we applied for the mortgage, to secure 2 small personal loans for emergency vet bills. Those loans weren't small. The lenders had been paid into accounts that traced back to Evan's dealership, then cashed out through a chain of prepaid cards. My name, my SSN, my damn credit. I felt like a stranger in my own life. But it didn't stop there. Embedded in the folder were screenshots, her texts with Evan and another contact labeled broker. They took on a tone I hadn't seen before. Clinical, efficient, almost bored. Next mark is Kevin. Unemployed, lives alone, gullible. Pick up tonight at 11. Drop off at apartment 3B. It read like a delivery manifest. And the images, they weren't all screenshots. There were surveillance stills from gas stations, photos of checks with my name on them, a scanned copy of my driver's license. My face on a document that had nothing to do with me. When I confronted her that night, she didn't deny any of it. She smiled the way a predator smiles when it knows you finally see the trap. "You think I did this alone?" she asked. "It's a network. There are tons of ways to make real money if you're willing to be smart." She said it like she was describing an investment strategy. I felt something inside me break that had nothing to do with money. Evan, it turned out, wasn't just a side piece. He was the one with the connections, the dealer, the man who arranged cash-outs and moved goods. Tara? A smokescreen. He'd been careful about that. He'd staged Instagram posts and family dinners, and nobody in Tara's circle had ever met the broker. The fiancé was the perfect cover. A normal life to blind anyone who looked too closely. The final gut punch came when I found a list of dates, court dates, tax deadlines, next to my name. They were flagged at risk. She'd deliberately run my credit and my identity through the ringer during the precise window when I was unemployed, expecting me to be distracted and embarrassed and slow. Her note said, "Delay notification. He'll figure it out later." She had planned for me to be humiliated, to take the financial fall without making noise. I sat on the kitchen floor, the ledger open on my lap, and laughed until it hurt. Not because it was funny, but because the depth of her calculation was almost artful in its cruelty. All the petty things, her smirks, the roommate line, the tattoo, were pieces of a much bigger game. I wasn't a pawn. I was collateral. And sitting in the glow of that laptop, with the ledger's columns reflecting in my eyes, a cold, methodical thought settled in. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, organized, personal, and it had ripple effects that could take me years to undo. So I did what I always do when my back is to the wall. I started planning. I printed every page. I copied every file. I made backups on drives on the flash I carried to the baby shower. If she had a network, then she left a map. If Evan had partners, then they were traceable. If my name was being used, then someone, somewhere was going to have to answer for putting it there. But there was another line in the ledger, one I hadn't understood at first. A shorthand note. "Tara, keep in dark." That made my stomach turn. Keeping Tara in the dark meant the baby, her family, her life. Everything was a weapon. I closed the laptop and stood up. The house was quiet, but it felt like a stage. I could see the next moves, who to hit, where to expose them. The ledger was the first domino. And hiding underneath those pages was something uglier than greed. Something that would explain everything about how Lila justified what she'd done. I folded the printouts into a neat stack and labeled them, "For Tara," because if she was going to be a mother to Evan's child, she deserved to know whose money was paying for the nursery. After I found the ledger, something inside me changed. I stopped being scared. I stopped shaking every time her phone buzzed. Instead, I started treating it like a project. One last job to finish before I burned it all down. I made lists, names, dates, documents. I organized everything into folders labeled by month. I backed up copies on a cloud drive she didn't know existed, and another on a cheap burner phone I kept in the glove box. I even recorded a few of our conversations. Her voice saying things like, "You'll never prove anything," and "Nobody's gonna believe you." It wasn't rage anymore. It was precision. I started going through every transaction linked to her side accounts. Turns out she'd been running credit through companies in both our names, some legit, some not. When I called the first company to freeze a fraudulent card, the rep said, "You're the 5th person to call about this woman." That's when I realized it wasn't just me and Evan. There were others. But my focus stayed narrow: her, Evan, and Tara. I wanted the 3 of them in the same place when it happened. That's why the baby shower was perfect. Before that day, I spent 2 weeks making sure the right people saw the truth. I sent anonymous emails to Evan's dealership's HR department, to the bank's fraud division, even to Lila's boss. No threats, no anger, just documentation. I didn't care what they did with it. I just needed the dominoes to start falling. At home, I played dumb. Still sleeping in the same bed. Still making her coffee. Still pretending to be the pathetic roommate she thought I was. She had no clue that every morning, I was transferring evidence to a USB drive labeled tax returns. The night before the baby shower, she asked me if I could loan her $500 for a surprise. I almost laughed. I told her sure, I'd transfer it in the morning. What she didn't know was that my account had already been frozen. I'd closed everything under my name. That's when she started to get suspicious. She asked, "What's going on with you lately? You've been quiet." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Just tired of losing." She smirked, like she'd already won. The next day, I put on a clean shirt, grabbed that baby blue gift bag, and drove to the shower. I'd spent the night printing everything. Every message, every receipt, and a copy of that ledger with the Terra. Keep in dark, note highlighted. I also printed one last document, the one I hadn't told anyone about yet. It was a bank record showing two names on an account, hers and Evan's, but under primary account holder, it didn't say Evan Miller. It said Evan and Tara Miller. That account, the one they'd been funneling money through, was in Tara's name too. She just didn't know it. Lila and Evan had been using her SSN too. I didn't know if Tara would understand what she was looking at when she opened the bag, but I knew she'd feel it. I rehearsed what I was going to say too. No yelling, no theatrics, just calm truth. When I walked into that shower, I didn't even look at Lila first. I looked straight at Tara, and I said, I think you should open that before you name your baby after him. The room went dead quiet. You could have heard the ice melt in the punch bowl. I watched Lila's face drain of color when Tara reached inside the bag and pulled out the folder. Evan tried to grab it, but she shoved him away. Then she saw her own social security number on one of the documents. Her hand went to her stomach. What the hell is this? She whispered. Evan's voice cracked. It's not what it looks like. But I was already walking away. I didn't need to stay for the explosion. I'd spent enough of my life in the wreckage. What I didn't expect, though, was the call I got 3 days later, from someone whose name I didn't recognize but whose voice made everything click into place. Because Lila's network wasn't just a side hustle. It was a full-blown operation. And the man on the phone wasn't calling to threaten me. He was calling to warn me. 3 days after the baby shower, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something in me said to pick up. Is this Kevin sir? The man asked, calm but firm. Yes, I said. This is Detective Alvarez with Charlotte PD Financial Crimes Division. I think we need to talk about your wife. That was the first time anyone had said your wife in the past tense. My heart dropped. I thought maybe Lila had pressed charges on me for something. False accusations weren't out of character for her. But what he said next made my stomach turn inside out. She was picked up last night, he continued, along with a man named Evan Miller. We've been investigating a small fraud ring tied to a car dealership, a social media marketing firm, and multiple personal loan scams. Your name came up as a victim. Victim. It hit me that for the first time in a year, someone saw me that way, not as a fool, not as a pushover. A victim. He asked if I could come down to the station to give a statement. I said yes. When I got there, he showed me a whiteboard full of photos, charts, and arrows. I saw Lila's face near the center, Evan's beside hers, and next to them, someone I didn't recognize, a woman named Melissa Grant. Detective Alvarez said Melissa was the real mastermind. She'd recruited people like Lila to find marks. The trick was to target men going through layoffs, divorces, or family deaths. People too distracted or ashamed to notice when their credit started bleeding out. Lila wasn't just a participant. She was one of the most productive recruiters in the ring. He pointed to a list of names. Mine was one of 6. But next to my name, written in red, was a single word, terminated. I frowned. Terminated how? He gave me a look. We think it meant your usefulness was over. Once you caught on, they were planning to burn your credit, drain the last of your accounts, and vanish. That was supposed to happen the week after I exposed them at the baby shower. The detective said they'd raided Evan's apartment and found multiple IDs, prepaid debit cards, and over $40,000 in cash. They also found a phone registered under a fake name, mine. I realized what that meant. They hadn't just used my credit. They'd been using my identity to set up drop accounts. That broker I saw in Lila's messages? That was Melissa, and she'd been the one pulling the strings for both of them. Then came the real twist. Alvarez showed me an email thread recovered from Lila's laptop. It was between her and Melissa. In one of the last messages, dated just 2 days before the baby shower, Melissa wrote, "If he finds out, make it look like his idea. Push him to suicide. It'll clean the books faster." I just stared at that line until my hands started shaking. That's what she wanted. Not just to take my money. Not just to humiliate me. She wanted me gone so I couldn't report the fraud. Alvarez looked at me and said quietly, "You got lucky, man. You exposed them at the right time. Otherwise, they'd have left town, and you'd be sitting here facing charges under your own name. I drove home that night in silence. The whole drive felt like a ghost story where I was the ghost. Lila hadn't just cheated. She hadn't just lied. She'd weaponized me, then plotted to erase me. And yet, despite all that, she still had one last trick coming. Because while she sat in a holding cell waiting for her lawyer, I got an email from a burner address. No name, no signature. Just 2 sentences. She's not who you think she is. Check her birth certificate. And the house deed. I didn't understand it at first. But when I went to pull the deed from our closing documents, I saw something that froze me cold. The property wasn't under our names. It was under hers and Melissa Grant's. The woman who'd recruited her owned half my house. I went through those house papers 5 times before it finally sank in. When we'd bought the house 3 years earlier, Lila had insisted on handling the paperwork because, according to her, I was bad with details. I'd signed where she told me to, thinking everything was joint. Turns out it was joint, just not with me. Melissa Grant's name sat right beside hers as co-owner. Not me. Every single mortgage payment I'd made, every repair, every cent that went into that place. I'd been investing in property I didn't even legally own. When I told Detective Alvarez, he sighed and said, "That fits their pattern. The property's part of the laundering. They use the mortgages as collateral to secure loans under the victim's credit. When those loans default, the property gets foreclosed and they cash out first." I remember just sitting there, staring at the wall. So that was it. I was never supposed to have a life with her. I was just a financial placeholder, a temporary name they could burn once they were done using it. But it went even deeper than that. Lila hadn't even started as a recruiter. According to Alvarez, Melissa had found her 3 years ago on a dating app. Back then, Lila was already in debt. Massive credit card debt, some of it from old relationships she'd milked dry. Melissa's first favor was clearing one of those debts using a fake loan. After that, she told Lila she could make money, helping other women protect themselves from broke men. That's how she got hooked, thinking she was flipping the script. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the predator. And she liked it. They'd created a system that made Lila feel powerful. Melissa found the targets, Evan handled the logistics, and Lila did the infiltration, the emotional manipulation. She'd move in, get comfortable, push for shared finances, and then start quietly extracting. By the time she left, the guy's credit would be wrecked, his accounts drained, and the house in default. I asked Alvarez, "Why me?" He flipped through her interview notes and said, "She said you were perfect, stable, patient, the kind of guy who doesn't fight back until it's too late." Then he added, "And she liked the challenge. Said you were the kind of man who thought love could fix everything. She wanted to prove you wrong." That line hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. I had believed in her, even when she stopped being kind, even when she mocked me. I kept thinking there was a version of her buried under all the cruelty. Turns out there wasn't. The truth is, she didn't just want my money. She wanted to see how far she could bend me before I broke. That's why she'd laughed when I found Evan's shoes. Why she'd called me her roommate. Why she'd branded herself with his name like a victory flag. Every single act of cruelty had been intentional. Not just to cover the scam, but to test control. To see how much pain she could cause before I finally snapped. It wasn't about greed. It was about dominance. Melissa called it psychological leverage. In the notes they found on her laptop, she'd written that emotional humiliation made victims freeze longer, giving them time to move the money. They'd turned people's lives into business strategy. That's when I stopped feeling pity, stopped feeling fear, because now, finally, I understood her. Lila didn't see what she did as evil. She saw it as evolution. In her mind, people like me, people who trusted, who gave, who forgave, were weak. We existed to be used by the ones smart enough to take advantage. And she actually said that in her recorded statement. Alvarez played it back for me. Real men don't struggle. They adapt. They use people before they get used. Hearing her voice say those words almost broke something in me. But instead of grief, All I felt was this ice-cold clarity. Because now I had everything I needed. The evidence, the motive, the confessions, and one last card she didn't even know I had. The deed. That house wasn't technically mine. But the fraudulent loans tied to it were. And I realized there was a way to make her and Melissa pay, literally, for every dollar they'd stolen. They'd weaponized the system. I was about to use that same system to destroy them. I don't write this like some movie. There's no dramatic stash of cash or midnight arson. Revenge, in real life, is paperwork and patience and using the places they thought they controlled against them. After the detective's raid, I stopped doing stunts. I worked every angle the way a lawyer would. Civil claims, bank disputes, and public exposure. Detective Alvarez kept me in the loop with criminal evidence, phone extractions, transaction chains, the dealer's cash ledgers. I handed every printed file to his team and to a consumer fraud attorney I could barely afford. The lawyer agreed to a contingency. He'd go after them if I agreed to be the main plaintiff. First, we froze the money. Not mine, there's fraud alerts, subpoenas, emergency freezes on accounts tied to Evans' dealership and on the shell companies Melissa used. The bank compliance teams moved fast when they realized a federal probe had begun. The prepaid cards dried up. The cash they'd squirreled in apartment safes was seized during the raids. Their ability to move money evaporated overnight. Next, I used the ledger and the deed. Because Melissa's name was on our house deed, federal prosecutors put a lien on the property as part of asset seizure. The same ledger that looked like a prize to me became the government's roadmap. When I filed a civil suit for identity theft, housing fraud, and restitution, the judge signed an emergency order preventing any transfer or sale of the house while claims were pending. The mortgages that were supposed to be their backstop turned into a legal coffin they couldn't escape. Public exposure did the rest. I worked with a local investigative reporter who ran a two-part piece on the fraud ring. The story named names, showed receipts, and printed the screenshots I'd collected. Within days, Evan's fiancée, Tara, was in the paper too, furious and humiliated. She'd been used, weaponized, and she sued Evan for fraud and emotional damages. Her family turned on him. The social media life he'd staged fell apart. Lila did the thing she always thought made her untouchable. She mocked people who trusted her. That arrogance was now typed into court transcripts. Melissa, the so-called mastermind, had the worst fall. Her assets, cars, a small condo, and a chunk of bank accounts were frozen pending trial. The prosecutor offered her a deal. Cooperate and face reduced charges. She spat the name of another partner into the tape, and the case expanded. Legally, I didn't get back every cent. There are maximums on restitution and limits on what can be clawed back from prepaid cards and cash already spent. But the courts awarded me enough to pay back my debts, and the lien on the house meant they couldn't profit from it. The bank stopped foreclosing. Instead, it became evidence. The judge ordered joint liability assessments that left Lila and Melissa financially ruined. Evan lost his job and any trust he had left. The personal part, closure, was slower. Tara met me once, outside the courthouse, eyes hollow but steady. "You saved me from an entire life built on stolen money," she said. I believed her. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. We just both knew the cost had been too high. As for Lila, she texted me while she was in holding. "You were never my husband," she wrote. "You were a resource." I archived the message and sent it to the prosecutor. It became evidence. She laughed once more in court, but not at me. At the emptiness of what she'd created. The judge didn't laugh. A year later, they plead guilty. Melissa took most of the blame publicly. Evan got a shorter sentence for logistics, and Lila pleaded to charges that kept her out of federal prison but left her with felonies and a ruined name. The liens stayed. The judge ordered restitution and banned them from holding positions involving finances. I kept the house through a civil settlement. Costly, ugly, and not exactly mine the day we bought it, but mine now on paper, clean by court order. I spent months fixing it, painting rooms that had been emptied of honesty. I still wake up sometimes at 3 a.m. and hear the echo of their laughter, but those nights get fewer. Revenge didn't make me whole. It didn't erase the way she said, "Real men don't struggle." What it did was turn their machine against them. It made public what they built in private. When the final papers arrived, and the judge stamped the last order, I walked outside and kicked my old sneakers into the grass. Not to hurt them, just to feel the weight of where I'd come from. You can survive being used. Not every wound heals pretty. But sometimes the slow, boring work of truth is the only real weapon you have. And sometimes that's enough.